Hello and welcome to the NIGP webinar, Great Project Outcomes Start at the Source, how utilities procurement teams manage complex RFP decisions more efficiently with source technology, presented by Andy Baskerville and Robert Ferro. As part of Bonfire's product team, Andy focuses on ensuring the success of Bonfire's clients, utilities clients, including helping to continue developing the Bonfire platform to meet their unique procurement needs. He's passionate about equipping utilities teams with the best software and practices to be more effective in their roles as drivers of real strategic impact. Robert is currently the senior buyer for the Alameda County Water District, located in Fremont, California. Before moving to California, he worked in the public health, water, wastewater, and transit industries in the Washington, D.C. metro area. He's been working in public procurement for the past 20 years and possesses a thorough knowledge of public purchasing best practices. If at any time during the webinar you need technical assistance, please let us know in the Q&A box. During the presentation, you may submit questions to the Q&A box on your screen, and we will take them during specified parts of the presentation. Andy, would you like to go ahead and get us started?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Justin. And thank you to everyone here for joining us today. It's great to see so many of you here with us. We're really excited to be talking about today's topic with you and talking about procurement within that utilities context, and specifically how procurement teams in utilities can help better manage their bids and RFP decisions more efficiently using sourcing technology. So in today, everything we're covering is going to be from simple bids to multi-line items for things like supplies or parts, even to the complex, more RFP or capital project type projects. We're really excited today and fortunate to be joined by Robert, who's the senior buyer at the Alameda County Water District. And Justin, thank you so much for the introductions. We're really excited to have Robert here to share his firsthand experiences, some of their processes that they've used in the past, what they're using now, and kind of the results that they've been seeing from implementing sourcing software to combat some of the challenges that they are facing. Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Hello, all.
Robert, it'd be great. I know that we got that little introduction from Justin, but it'd be great to hear in your own words a little bit more about yourself and in your background and your role there at the district.
Well, as Justin had let everyone know, I've been in procurement for about 2 decades now. I started off in the public health industry, then moved over to water and wastewater, did a little stint in transit, and now I'm back in potable water. Over the years, we've seen how, and I'm sure everyone that's online now can attest to, how disjointed the evaluation process can be for any RFPs, especially if you're doing it in a manual setting. The advent of the online bidding platforms and the evaluation processes being able to be done online as well, limiting all of, better said, taking away all the limitations that we have had for space, time, and whatnot with all of our technical evaluation teams has just been great. It's a time saver across the board, which we all know now that I'm assuming everyone else is in the same boat as I am, where we all have to do more with less. So every little bit helps.
It sounds to me that we've got the perfect guy to talk to about today's topic, Robert. So really excited to dive into the content today and to get your thoughts as we go along. Here's a broad outline of what we wanted to be discussing today. And, at the beginning, there's going to be a lot of talking from me, more so around some of these big barriers that we're facing. Robert, you mentioned a few of them there, and as well as some of the technology gaps that may exist for a lot of the procurement folks on the line today. But really, after helping set that stage, our goal here is to make today's session a lot more interactive with Robert, as well as with everyone here today in our audience. So throughout, we're going to be speaking with Robert about his experiences, and we're also going to be doing some poll questions, and that's to help guide our conversation to what's relevant to you. Now, it's worth noting that while Robert has a background in, or is currently at least a water utility, we're also going to be talking about and discussing things that apply to all utilities. So whether you're listening from a sewer or a gas or electric utility, these common experiences are things that I think are transferable across not just water, but any utility as well. In that context that I wanted to set up for us today, it's really focusing at the simplest or most basic level on this balancing act that we're all really familiar with. And that's, how do we keep rates affordable and that's whether you're a wholesale or a retail utility, while also maintaining that reliable, safe service. And these are shared goals that we all have. But, and I'm sure as I say this, is going to be a lot of nodding heads on the line as well. There are forces that are impacting this balancing act. And it's not just about being aware of, and I'm sure everyone is aware of, but it's about adjusting. And specifically as procurement, we have a responsibility, or we need to be reacting to these forces in order to keep this balancing act in check. And really what we're talking about is all these impacts or environmental forces are having an impact on rates. And as we know, rates are increasing, and there's a number of different factors for that. We have things like aging infrastructure. So in the context of water, the EPA estimates that America's water and wastewater infrastructure will require more than $650 billion of investment over the next 20 years. And that's only to maintain our current levels of service, forgetting the growth that we're all trying to experience and adjust to. Looking at electricity, much of the construction of electricity infrastructure happened in the early 1900s. And while there was a huge amount of growth in the 40s and 50s, we're now seeing a lot of older transmission and distribution lines reaching the end of their natural lives and their useful lives. So many utilities have developed charges specifically to help alleviate the cost or pain points of these capital projects or ongoing replacement due to aging infrastructure. There's also an imperative to be investing in new technology. So public expectations have changed. Government expectations have changed. There's a popular movement towards green and renewable energies and technologies, and using data to be more impactful in what we're doing. We've got climate change. We've got risk management that we need to be keeping into account, or emergency responses, and climate change conditions, which are challenging the resilience of all of our systems, as well as turnover in the workforce. So we're seeing not only people retiring, but we're seeing this shortage of experience, or this demand for experience in situations where, as Robert alluded to, you said, doing more with less. Teams have to be leaner than ever. So how do we ensure that everyone's equipped to be able to meet these challenges? Now, I'm not outlining any of these to be alarmist. Chances are everyone is very much aware of these. But my point in bringing them up is that we cannot simply keep operating the way that we always have. And that's really why we created this webinar. And that's why we asked Robert to join us, is explain, what's happening, why it matters, and really what we can all do about it. And I think the really exciting thing here about this today's session, this topic, is that I believe that procurement plays this pivotal strategic role in being able to deliver those essential services at that affordable rate. So balancing the requirements and costs to maximize value for dollars, which in turn helps reduce the risk of our vendors and helps ensure that while we're following rules and regulations, we can maintain that reliable service delivery. Now, that sounds really easy, and I'm sure all of us face challenges where we're often bogged down by more tactical things. What we're talking about here on screen is a very strategic initiative and a very strategic role for procurement. But it's very difficult for us to transform the way that our utilities work when we're bogged down with these more transactional or more administrative tasks, which really hold us back from being able to add value at this level. And that's really what we want to get into, is how can we use technology, or how can we impact process changes to better equip you to be able to do this kind of task, to deliver these kinds of results to your organization. Now, I think that's enough of me talking. We'd like to hear from you in the audience at this point about some of the challenges you're facing before we move on. And we'd love to hear your opinions on this question, as it'll help frame and guide our conversation today and make it as relevant for you. So the question we'd like to be asking you is, what is the biggest challenge that is facing specifically your procurement team? So we've got a few options here. High demand with limited resources. So as Robert alluded to, that doing more with less. Difficulty in attracting enough qualified vendors and growing your vendor pool. Having heavy administrative burden on the actual execution of your bids or potentially RFP or RFX processes. You find it challenging to be working with internal stakeholders, so whether that's people helping you craft the requirements or potentially your valuation team, or if there's another option here. So we're just going to give you a couple more seconds here to get your answer. And while that's happening, Robert, do any of these challenges sound familiar to you in your background, in your experience?
They all sound very familiar. It's a day-to-day thing. Just by the high demand, limited resources, what I was alluding to before, yes. The doing more with less. difficulty of attracting enough qualified vendors. If you've been in this industry long enough, you know that in some agencies that are not large governmental or federal agencies, at one point in time, not too far back in the past, were mailing out full bid packets, and just the time that it entailed to ensuring that those addresses were still current, and then printing all the bid packet out and sending it out via mail was just it was pretty bad. Pretty bad.
That's fair to say, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are able to empathize with that. Okay, we're going to close down the poll here and just take a look at the results. And it very much what you point out, Robert. High demand, limited resources, being asked to be doing more with less. We're seeing a lot of teams are either remaining the same, or in some cases even shrinking, but being asked to take on a much bigger role in terms of volume of projects, how much we need to buy. So maybe this doesn't come as a surprise for anyone on the phone. And certainly these are things that we hear all the time. These are commonly heard things from our clients, but also from our potential clients, is that limited staff resources. It's extremely hard to be able to get through the mountain of work. Imagine all those bid packets, the war rooms that you probably all have containing all the binders and documents and boxes. How can we do that scope of work with the limited resources we have? How do we be more efficient? How do we ensure that we're remaining compliant to those rules and regulations? Everyone on the line is compliant to those, but how much time does it take you to be compliant? And especially when you're already limited for how you run the projects, how much time can you afford to be dedicating to ensuring that audit trail is there? It's difficult also to be running what we've called complex evaluations, but essentially what we're talking about is how do you ensure that you're running evaluations smoothly where you've got either very tight or very prescriptive requirements and ensuring that you're meeting those, or potentially doing a more thorough analysis using much more data. And these are all very difficult things to do in that manual process that Robert alluded to. And these are areas that point to where technology can help or procedural changes can help. Robert, talking about these gaps, you mentioned that it wasn't long ago they were doing these bid packages. Prior to implementing any kind of process change or software changes, how were you previously managing your bids or your RFX projects?
Well, currently we are utilizing Bonfire. And I do have to admit that I'm sure this is not just an aspect of Bonfire's platform, but most online systems allow you to utilize or create templates. So if you've got a quick RFQ that you want to put out there, the creation of the RFQ and being able to shoot it out to any number of vendors, especially utilizing vendors, the entire platform's vendor registration pool versus just your own vendor database. It's the best way. I mean, we all know that having more competition is in our best interest. And sometimes there may be sister agencies that are relatively local to where I am that know of other vendors that I don't, and the ability to utilize a system that shares the vendor database is pretty key to establishing a very good competitive pool for whatever solicitation you're looking to put out there.
So when you're talking about templates and you're talking about managing or trying to grow your vendor pool, was that done using Excel? Was that done, how are you managing that process before?
Before, we were utilizing an aspect of our content management system. Most small municipalities or small agencies may be familiar with Civic Plus. It's a very robust content management system, but unfortunately, the actual posting of the bids and the maintaining of the vendor database, it's not tailored to that. So there were always a lot of workarounds that you would have to do, a constant cleanup of your vendor database because either the person that entered the information is no longer there wasn't enough education with the vendors. It was all just very, very difficult to maintain. And more often than not, there's only one of us that's doing that in the procurement department.
Right. And when you're talking about those solicitations that you're receiving, was it all paper-based?
Oh, yes. Yes. They were all, back in the past, they were all paper-based. Word, then having to put them into PDFs of, well, in some cases, like I had mentioned before, sending them out via mail. More recently, doing it via email. But still, when you were receiving those RFQs, you were receiving them via email. But even though the IFBs would still have to be open publicly, so you're still doing a public bid opening, which takes time. You're still recording everything in person there for anyone that wanted to show up. So it's just a lot of time that was taken out of our day.
Right.
The new systems that allow you to, do the automatic evaluation of line item bids, it's just so much more efficient now. Right.
And I don't think anyone, no matter what platform you're using, you're going to see some benefit in terms of streamlining those things that would take up so much time in your day, especially when we're all feeling that pressure for a lack of resources. You don't want to be spending your time scanning things to PDF and loading them into a CMS platform.
No.
You'd rather be adding value in other ways. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who feel the same way. Our next question is really asking our audience here today about what they are currently using, because I think that's really going to help us understand where to focus. And it sounds like, from what I can hear, Robert, your experience is not dissimilar from what we commonly hear. A lot of people have to make use of either platforms that were already in place or things that weren't necessarily custom built for procurement or purpose built for procurement. So the question we're asking here is what technology you're currently using to run or manage your bid or RFX process. So whether it's a bid posting platform, so something where you can post, maybe even receive solicitations back, whether you're utilizing a module from your ERP, so that's not uncommon either. Potentially some teams don't have a dedicated technology in place, and this certainly sounds, apart from Civic Plus, this is a boat that many people are in. So paper submission, maybe using Excel to tabulate or to do that quick calculation, or using email to communicate with vendors, or some combination above. So if we're just going to give you a minute here or a few seconds here to respond, Robert, when it came to managing the awarding side of your process, was that done through your website? You mentioned you had to do opening bids, but for other projects, how did you manage that part of your process?
The other parts it was all basically manual.
Right.
There, if it was an RFP, everything was done manually. Evaluations were all done via Excel. Once we had all the evaluations in, we would get together, find a time and space where we would get together, do our consensus scoring, do the recommendations, and subsequently, if the award merited board approval, prepare documentation to go to the board, which all takes a lot of time. You're doing literally everything manually. The write-up of the procurement process, also manual. Just very labor intensive when it comes to doing those manual processes.
Right, and it looks like most of our audience here today have some form of bid posting or solicitation system, while many have a combination of different things. And this is pretty common for us. I'm not surprised to see this. I'm sure, Robert, you're not surprised to see this either. I think a lot of teams have tried to begin that process of modernizing their systems, and a very frequent and a logical first step is that posting and solicitation system. So I'm glad to see so many of you on the line today have that in place. I'm a little surprised that ERP is so low, but that's good for us to know moving forward. When we look at what everyone's using, and this is really good information for us moving forward, is even with that bid solicitation project, we're noticing that there are still some gaps. And you mentioned this just a few moments ago, Robert, in the evaluation side of things. And so this is typically where a lot of people have that gap. And choosing a supplier or choosing a technology to be able to help you achieve a more streamlined evaluation process is a force multiplier for especially a small team. I'm really glad you brought up both the front end and the back end of your process being manual. And I think this is relevant for everyone on the line today. If they do have a bid and solicitation platform, this is typically what we see on screen. You do online posting, you've got a platform from that, you're able to receive online submissions. At the end of the day, you may have an ERP system, or in some cases, a statewide portal or an organizational website or interportal that you have to be able to put that information in. That could be owned by finance, that could be owned by the local government level, whatever that system looks like. But in the middle, there's this gray area where you've collected your requirements, you've got all your bids. Now you have to try and analyze and determine who your best suppliers are. And this is typically where that manual process makes the biggest impact. This is where you're making your decision. And getting this part right is so critical because you need to be able to make the best decision on behalf of your utility and be able to make those great decisions. And it can be concerning for many that they still have this gap where even if you are posting and soliciting online, you still have to download and do your evaluation still in Excel or still on paper or upload it back into an ERP system. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And there are certainly a number of different limitations. And I think you mentioned some of these. This slide has the limits of ERPs, but essentially what we're talking about is that manual process of trying to use something like a Civic Plus, a CMS platform, or anything that's not really purpose made for this process, is that it tends to be inflexible. So, you mentioned templating. Does it effectively allow you to do templating? Does it give you the flexibility to collaborate with people? Typically, these are difficult to use, mainly because, and you mentioned this with Civic Plus, they're not made to do this. This is not their primary task. So trying to kind of squish a square into a round hole can be really difficult for a lot of teams. And quite often they don't have purpose-made evaluation tools to allow you to do proper bid comparison or analysis. So, Robert, when you think about those challenges in that middle section, I'm just going to flip back to that slide just for a second. When you think about those challenges, do you feel like there's anything there that you'd want to add to that? Or are there any challenges that you feel everyone on the line should know about in terms of that manual process?
I mean, I don't know about everyone else, but I had run into the past. The real issue that I found was we're a relatively lean agency. So the idea of finding evaluators for RFPs and then having them have to review these things while in the office and then meeting with us. I mean, having the time and finding the available space to actually sit down is also an issue that we ran into a lot. As I had mentioned not too long ago that we had one bid submission, or better said, one evaluation. The evaluators aren't even part of this agency. It's a multi-agency RFP. So the evaluators are in different agencies where we have to mail out the evaluation packet, which can also just can be so cumbersome and allow for so many errors to happen, not even getting the packet to begin with. And then those just bring up other issues that are pretty insane. Moving forward with the ability to evaluate online and ensure that your evaluators have everything online is it's a lot more efficient and streamlined for the evaluation process.
So, Robert, do you do any form of consensus on a lot of your projects? Do you do any consensus meetings?
We do. For every single RFP, we do a consensus meeting as well.
Okay.
Because regardless of how well placed how well the proposals may be written, your evaluators are looking at the proposals from their own, perspective. Mm-hmm. So if you have an outlier in one of the evaluations, you have to get together and figure out what happened.
Right. And I think everyone on the line would probably agree that that's the best practice, especially when we're talking about those more complex projects. I'm glad you brought the idea of like collaboration and doing it online. Our evaluation teams are busy people. Evaluating your project may not be the highest priority on their list. And so, understanding they've got a day job too, it can be really challenging to get them engaged in your project or to have progress. And you may end up actually, chasing down people. Is that been part of your experience?
Yes. Yes and no.
Okay.
It always helps to have, as part of your evaluation team, the lead for the project to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
so the end user. It assists in, because they want to have their project completed as quick as possible. It always helps to put a little bit of the onus of reaching out to the other technical evaluators on them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the way I've been doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of tag team the evaluators.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah.
you do tend to have to reach out and ask if they're ready or not.
Well, especially when you're using something like Excel to do that evaluation or a manual process, it can be really hard for you to know even how much progress they've made. You might set a deadline, but you're kind of in the dark until you have that, either try to organize that first consensus meeting, or you try and reach out to your evaluators to know where they stand. You're definitely in the dark.
Yeah. Completely in the dark, because there is no tracking mechanism. The
Right.
only tracking mechanism would be an email. And
Right.
at that point, it's either they're ready or they're not.
Right. Exactly. And using email, and I don't mean to be too cruel towards Excel, but email and Excel are very common tools that a lot of teams use. And frankly, it's because they're so ubiquitous. I mean, I think I heard a stat that's like one in 7 people in the world use Excel. So everyone knows how to use it. It's a very common tool. But when it comes to doing this kind of evaluation, and there's some stats there on screen, it's a little bit terrifying, because not only are there risks of errors, but also my Excel file doesn't give you insight into what I'm doing. And there's always the risk of, when I'm trying to combine them all together, that something goes wrong. And so, yeah, you lose the collaboration aspect. You lose, or you have this new error prone or risk of error. And then you're stuck doing this manual data entry or trying to deduplicate stuff and make sense of all the siloed data. And then you still have to pull it together and do that kind of consensus meeting. And, for you, Robert, in your experience, for those more complex type of RFPs, like, how long would it typically take you to go from the start of the project through to gaining consensus, having done this whole aggregation and sort of manual chasing?
Start of the project from putting the RFP out on the street, or just starting from the eval process?
Maybe starting from the eval process.
Normally, it's between 2 to 3 weeks.
Right.
That it may take us to complete an evaluation.
And is that in today's world, or is that back when you were using manual processes?
Oh, that was back when I was doing manual processes.
Okay. Okay. So that to me is again a common time frame for somebody who's trying to do it manually, because that can always be a tough part of the process. But I think what I'm getting out of this conversation with you, Robert, is that a lot of what you were facing in terms of challenges were around that manual, time-consuming, kind of cumbrous process. And there's a lot of key challenges there on screen about each stage of that. I guess, having talked about that for a little while now, I guess the question I have for you is, keeping in mind or taking into account all these key challenges that you've mentioned and the common ones on screen, what was kind of the tipping point or the main time where you gained the motivation to, you or your team started looking for that software solution or for that procedural change to help fix kind of this broken or cumbersome status quo? What was kind of the tipping point for you?
Well, I mean, honestly speaking, I had come to California from the East Coast, and I worked literally a stone throws away from Silicon Valley. And in other organizations that I had worked for, there was an online mechanism. Here, there was nothing. And it was extremely cumbersome to do all of the manual processes, not just the evaluation, but developing the solicitation and then mailing them out. And it seemed kind of, I guess it's the juxtaposition of being, in the heart of the technology sector in the US and really not having any technology, period, to help me do my job. And I had already experienced some of the advantages that one can have by having an online bidding system, and at a previous job. So that was one of the key things, but it was also the matter of just trying to do as much as possible with the limited resources that we have. I mean, we all knew that we would be able to bid out items far quicker with this type of platform. In addition to the evaluation of line item bids, if you've got 20, 30, 40 line items on a bid that you're putting out there, if you've got a system that will evaluate it for you right then and there versus actually putting everything in an Excel spreadsheet, that's hours and hours of time that you're basically inputting data and doing an analysis. And anyone that's used Excel can attest to the fact that at one point in time in their career, they have missed the formula in one of the cells.
Right.
I mean, we've all been there.
Yeah.
But it was really the fact that we couldn't access the vendor pool that we wanted to by just doing everything manual.
Right.
There was just a lot of different factors that we all knew we had to move forward, and I was able to get buy-in from the appropriate people at the time, and we started looking.
So you mentioned, like, again, the sort of the theme of doing more with less. Were your project volumes increasing kind of year over year?
They were increasing. And not only that, when I came on board, we were also going through the process of centralizing the procurement. So we were going from a decentralized to a more centralized procurement office, and that just increased the workload considerably.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing you said there I found was really interesting. So having moved from the East Coast over to the West Coast, and then finding yourself in this very much a tech area, or tech supportive area, do you find that in your experience that made it organizationally more open to technology change versus potentially what you found on the East Coast?
I don't think that had that much of an issue that was much of a factor. I think it's more a case of, I just went from a larger agency to a far smaller one. So because we were also, like I said, we were going from decentralized to centralized, we were revamping how the agency was doing procurement to begin with. And with a decentralized system, you don't expect all of your end users to be up to date on current, technologies dealing with online bidding. The purchasing process for them was basically, they would go out and do their own little RFQs or mini bids and get work done. So it was literally just, they needed something, they would procure it, and then they would use it right then and there.
Right.
And they weren't always obtaining the best deals by leveraging cooperative agreements, or actually utilizing other vendors that are out there doing the competition that's required.
Right. And do you think a lot of that has to do with just simply bandwidth?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was an issue there too.
Okay.
We needed that.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the sort of unspoken things is, you mentioned going from a larger agency to that. It sounds like they had a much more sophisticated technology to help them out. To a smaller agency, I think one of the things, even as individuals, we've come to expect technology to play a bigger role in what we do. I mean, so many of us have things like Netflix or Hulu or something similar, and I think it would be very alien for us to expect to sit through ads on a TV or wait for the scheduled time for our program to come on, when now our expectation is that technology is actually enabling us to get to where we want to faster. And I feel like that's also definitely something that I think a lot of people, a lot of folks I've talked to has been a point for them, is why isn't our procurement as easy as Netflix, if that makes sense.
Yeah, unfortunately, in my experience, government in general, is always late to the game when it comes to technology. You normally find all the advances in technology in the private industry because the private industry is always looking to minimize costs wherever possible. So it took a while before procurement was really recognized as a place where you could actually realize cost savings for an agency. And I'm glad it has happened. I think I saw a real turnaround maybe around like 11, 12 years ago, where procurement got a pretty big bump in the fact that we know what we're doing and we're trying to minimize the cost for our agencies and get the best value and best price for what we're doing. This is just another online bidding tools and evaluation tools are just one more way that we can meet our agency's needs.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that, because I feel like there's definitely been a sense of kind of this false superiority from people who have been in private sector, who are in private sector, that somehow, public sector and specifically like utilities are behind, or, they're not quite as sharp. And I think if anything, that has proven to be categorically untrue. And while that shift has been taking place, I feel like a lot of agencies are definitely going in the right direction. I mean, just seeing from the poll questions, we have over 50% of people have some form of technology in place to help modernize. That's well ahead of other well-known government sectors. So, I think that myth has been dispelled. And, I think judging by the audience level that we have today, clearly, there's an interest, a hunger, and an excitement for improving processes with technology, which is fantastic to see. One of the things that you mentioned about when you were reaching that tipping point was around buy-in. And especially when you're talking about potentially government obviously moving a bit slower, or, I'm not going to say dragging their heels, but it's definitely more of a process to implement these kinds of big changes. When it came to making the case internally for investment in something, in a software platform, how did you go about getting that buy-in and demonstrating the benefit of, adopting some kind of system?
Well, it was a long, arduous process. Honestly speaking, between starting to look at the different options out there and finally concluding on one, it was a span of about 2 years before we got everyone's buy-in on going online with a lot of this. Mind you, this is also a change, and each agency is in one step or another of some sort of change. We had just gone through a very, I guess most end users would consider it a shocking ERP change. So you also have to, we had to weigh that aspect within our agency, because we had just changed our ERP, and 80% of the people that now have to use the ERP did not before. So everything was new. Throw in another aspect of change, and people are already fearful. At least in my agency, they were.
Right.
So it was a question of making the appropriate business case to the appropriate people at the appropriate time.
Right. And I think that's a common theme. Like change and change management can be a very terrifying thing, especially if the organization is doing other things.
Yes, it can.
And not to mention also, we've mentioned many times now just how doing more with less and having those limited resources, if you're busy just trying to tread water with your current workload or trying to get things off your desk, it's awfully hard to also implement process changes to help alleviate that when you're so busy.
Yes, it is. I know we try to divvy up some of that work, allowing my boss will most likely is usually the one that's taking care of the process changes. But again, whenever you're doing any sort of change management, you have to get everyone's buy-in. We are currently in the process of doing a little bit more of process improvement, but not just the bidding, some of our thresholds and whatnot that would reduce some of the administrative timelines for our end users. anyone that deals with an operations department knows that they are extremely reactive. So unless you already have those contractual mechanisms in place to meet every single one of their needs, they are going to be hollering at your door trying to get some stuff, whatever service or product they might need to repair whatever piece of equipment may have broken down right then and there.
Right.
So having all of these things in place beforehand, well, it's hard, but it's some of the failures of the manual process help you in your business case for going online.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're in a few minutes, we're going to dive into kind of some of the benefits that you've realized by moving your process online into a software. But in terms of your search, when you were looking for a platform, so knowing it feels like your team had a very good recognition for where any weak points exist in your process or the pain points you had. When you were in your search for a solution to those pain points, what were some of the must-have features or functionality that you knew needed to exist in whatever solution you chose?
Well, one of them was being able to utilize vendor lists of the entire platform, not just ours. We've seen that with other colleagues in their experience had seen it with other platforms, and they could attest to the benefits of being able to either shoot a solicitation out regionally or nationally, depending on what the required service may be. So that was one of the key points for us. Another was trying to reduce the time or the administrative time that we had by, locating space, trying to make the time to do our consensus scoring. So something that could be evaluated online was also very big. Something that had contracts management, because more often than not, you're utilizing different systems for managing the resulting contracts of your solicitations. So the idea was try to house everything in one place, and if at all possible, insurance as well. I mean, the wish list was pretty long in what we needed, but the online bidding, the evaluation, the automatic tabulation of line item bids, and the vendor portion of it was very, very big for us.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that, as you're searching for platforms, knowing that a lot of the people in the audience today have a bid of solicitation platform, but might be left kind of in the wind when it comes to the evaluation or any stages beyond that, is that idea of end-to-end. Can you do all these things in one place instead of bouncing between different technologies? As well as even just having the support that if you have questions about how to use something or if something's broken, how quickly can you get that kind of support for your platform? Because you don't want to be left in the wind if something goes wrong as well.
Correct.
Fast forwarding, you've got kind of this wish list of things. You're aware of kind of what you're looking for. You've done some research. You've selected a platform. What were some of the, what was your experience like moving from that manual process into that new software? And like, what was that implementation process like for you? And basically, how did that change management work out, especially in comparison to your expectation?
Well, coming from, as I alluded to before, we'd already gone through change management with our ERP, so our expectations were very, very low. I hate to say it, but they were. We had gone. It was not a very the previous change that we did with ERP was not very good. So what we tried to do with implementing this one was trying to get all of our end users. First, ultimately, it was our procurement team. So we had to do a lot of training with the online team, and they assisted us in how everything was going to look. The look and the feel of any online system has to be somewhat intuitive. If it's not, it just becomes a little bit more cumbersome.
Mm-hmm.
And the assistance that we received in the training was actually very, very good. It was very effective.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of training materials readily available should we have any questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked out better than we had anticipated. I'm not gonna lie. We moved relatively quickly from not utilizing our Bonfire system to utilizing it in the span of maybe a month from the first training that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started putting all of our RFQs, all of our IFBs are on there now.
Mm-hmm.
Change from RFP, the use from putting our RFPs on there was a little bit more cumbersome, just
mm-hmm.
because we also had to train our evaluators.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question is getting them on board, letting them know what's coming. Most of them were a little reticent, but at this point they are getting more and more comfortable with utilizing Bonfire, and we hope to be really up and running within the next, I would say, 4 to 5 weeks. We should have all of our end users, or at least the heavy end users, on board and all trained up. I know that I've had some very good feedback from some of them so far.
That's awesome to hear. You mentioned, buy-in and getting people on board with using it. Did you find that there's a difference between getting buy-in from, say, your team specifically versus those external stakeholders? And how did you get them bought into using an online platform?
Well, to an extent, we had to, it's a little bit of a carrot and a stick. I mean, obviously, they're going to have to utilize whenever they want to get one of their, if they want a project done, they're going to have to go through the RFP process. So they're going to have to come through us regardless. We didn't want to pose it in the sense that either you learn it or you don't get anything done, but we assisted them in realizing how easy it is to use, where they can do everything online. They don't have to be printing out all of the Excel documents. They don't have to be printing out everything. A lot of the Q&A portion that you might have in any solicitation can be done right there in the system in and of itself. So at least some of the compliance side of it, whether they've submitted these forms or not, they don't have to review that. All they have to review is the actual technical part. And then the way that you can score within the system, you can either do it by a scale, or you can do your points, and allowing them that flexibility where because when you're creating your RFP, you're getting their input to begin with. So you frame it in a way where the document, while it's partly theirs at that point. So they're assisting you in developing the whole requirements.
Right. And sorry, go ahead, Robert.
Helps for them to have some ownership.
Yeah, and some skin in the game, right? And understanding that this actually kind of answers the "what's in it for me" question.
Exactly.
Right. And so you alluded to a few things there, which is a nice segue into understanding some of the benefits you received. Obviously, there's benefits to the flexibility side and helping to alleviate some of those challenges where it comes to handling physical submissions or doing that evaluation process and trying to get consensus. What were some of the main benefits that you saw bringing sourcing software into your utilities procurement team?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
No, sorry. I was just asking, in terms of bringing that software into your team, what are some of the main benefits that you guys experienced in moving to an online platform? I know you've alluded to some of those things, throughout today's session, but what are some of those main benefits?
Well, I mean, obviously for our line item bids for the long ones, or for the multi-line item bids, the automatic evaluation where you can click a button and basically it will tell you all of the lowest cost for each line item. you can click another button and it will tell you what it would cost per vendor versus per line item. It's just the analysis is done far quicker than before. What we also observed was the audit trail. The audit trail is big for any government agency, and the most online platforms have an automatic audit trail and a reports function. So you're not actually typing up what the procurement process was. The procurement process is just at a click of a button, which is, I mean, for anyone that's actually had to write up afterwards everything that happened and then your recommendations, that could also be time consuming.
Right. No, absolutely. Rob, just looking at the time we've got a few more minutes here. We do want to do a live Q&A if anyone has any questions. So one of the things I'd like to ask you, and you've gone into depth about, the benefits that you've received as a team. What have been some of the impacts on your suppliers and your evaluators? And you have alluded to some of that, but also, were there any benefits or results that were a bit more unexpected that you weren't necessarily expecting to get a benefit from in terms of moving your systems online?
One thing was that we made the vendor database self-service. So in this sense, we're not maintaining it anymore. We don't have to clean it up. The vendors do it on their own. And I know that at least from one of my team members that manages all of our insurances, the vendors are now doing that on their own. You click a processing option so that document is required and they have to upload it when they're registering. Having that on is just, it alleviated her workload considerably versus having to maintain it manually and save it in different SharePoint files, and then in our ERP system where the POs are issued. That was one unexpected benefit that we really liked. I know she did.
Yeah, I can understand that.
But I will say this, for the vendors, those vendors that are larger don't have an issue with registering and getting everything that they require. We did find a little bit of a need for hand holding with some of the smaller mom and pop shops. And I know most people have, local and minority owned business enterprise, different programs in place. And sometimes those mom and pop shops that are close to your agency aren't always on top of technology. So I did find that we had to do a little bit of hand holding with that, but going out and doing some outreach with like a vendor fair or something along those lines always helps. It helps to get you at least a little bit of a face-to-face with your local vendor pool.
Right, absolutely, and also having that support network that should your suppliers have issues, especially if, like you said, they're a mom and pop shop and they're not necessarily used to doing this, having that support network for them to make sure that they're not disadvantaged when it comes to your bids. Correct.
It helps. I know that they have as much support as we have, so right. It's actually very, very convenient for them.
Amazing. Well, keeping in mind that we want to have a little bit of Q&A time, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. And I want to ask you kind of I know it's kind of a loaded question for the end of a webinar, Robert, but in terms of, obviously, a lot of people have shown up on the webinar today. They're interested in understanding and learning about how technology can help get them from that pre-digital state into where your team is at in terms of your ability to be efficient and make that strategic impact on the organization. For those on the line who are looking to make that kind of move or to understand better how technology can help them, what advice would you give to those utilities procurement teams who aren't currently using that technology but are looking to get started?
Demos.
Yep.
To be honest with you, having the products demoed for them assists a great deal. And granted, whenever you're dealing with a you're dealing with a salesperson, because ultimately they will be. They will have a lot more. Let's just say that the salesperson has in-depth knowledge of what they are demoing for the agencies or the people.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to put your work in there. I mean, when you're demoing something or demoing a software, look for those pitfalls that you may find with trying to implement either that process, because in some cases you may be having to revamp your procurement process, or having to implement it with your end users and take into consideration the change management that may be necessary on the back end after you procure it.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty daunting. I'm not going to lie. As I mentioned, it took us nearly 2 years to get there, but as long as you have your list of your needs, of what you want to have, what you need to have versus what you want to have, and then just go and do as many demos as you have to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think for them, I think the key for most people, I would say the key is to be able to utilize various vendor pools, and the automatic tabulation for items is just, it's insane. I love it.
I'm happy to hear that. Robert, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much. I'd like to give an opportunity for anyone on the line to ask a question. If they do have a question for Robert, obviously we want to respect your time here, and we may not be able to get through all the questions, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to send them in, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. If we can't get to any or all of them on the session, we'll try and respond to them after the webinar concludes. Justin, are there any questions that the audience has had for either myself or for Robert?
Yes. So Karen placed a statement in the Q&A. I feel like a lot of our vendors are technology challenged, and I worry that a system like this would just frustrate them.
Some of them may be. Honestly speaking, I had alluded to the fact that we did have some smaller mom and pop shops that didn't want to go through the hassle. But unfortunately, I mean, you can't limit your ability to be more efficient for your agency just because of certain vendors. Taking the time to do a vendor fair, to do the outreach, is pretty big. We did one not too long ago, and the amount of feedback that we got was considerable, and it was all relatively good. I just feel that we should have been doing more vendor outreach in the front end. Right now, I think we're going to try to do something every couple of years, but it does help. And if you do intend to do some sort of reverse vendor fair where you have the vendors come to you, having a couple of computers already there with a couple of staff that that can assist them through this really helps. It really does.
Great, thanks, Robert. Have there been any unexpected results or impacts from using technology?
Well, I had alluded to the fact that one of my teammates has her workload has gone down because of the ways we were able to leverage the technology and putting the onus of a lot of the work she had to do on the vendor themselves.
What kinds of activities are your team working on with the freed up time?
There's always more projects and more solicitations to put out there. Unfortunately, we aren't a huge team, so even though we have a little bit more time, it's really rolled into getting more stuff done. It also helps us. I mean, a little bit more time does help us to either. Well, we're also going through a records management change. We're going digital. So while we may have free time from the procurement aspects, we have to look at this at the other change management that we're going through. And if anyone has gone through the paper to digital, it's extremely time consuming.
Can you elaborate on the feedback from suppliers? How have they handled the change?
In general, most of them it was better for them. The fact that for at least the bids, mind you, if you were doing sealed bids and having them mailed in, the vendors would have had to mail them in either 24 to 48 hours or actually have someone physically take the bid submittal and courier take it over physically to our agency. Doing it in this manner affords them more time to actually have it submitted. That transportation cost and time is gone.
If you have a separate system for vendor registration, for example, an ERP system, do vendors have to re-register in Bonfire?
We have always had two vendor databases, one for our ERP system and one for our online bidding. So the ERP system, unfortunately, does not only have vendors, but it has customers as well. So we never based our procurement vendor database system through the ERP. While anyone that has been awarded either a purchase order or an agreement will have their information in our ERP system, it doesn't necessarily encompass every vendor that's out there.
For lack of funding, is there a way to better utilize old technology for the procurement process until a software can be purchased?
It really would depend on the old technology that you're currently utilizing. Again, without more knowledge of your current technology, it would be kind of hard to say no, but I would assume you would be able to leverage your old technology with maybe in combination with some other current technology that you may have there to do that. But without specifics, it gets a little hard.
Yeah, and Robert, I can chime in there just for a second. Certainly, there are a lot of teams who are needing to kind of make do right now with having a lack of funding or not even being able to put it in budget. And certainly, there are ways to optimize using Excel, and there's more sophisticated ways. Unfortunately, from the experience that I've seen with the clients and potential clients that we've worked with, there's a limit to how much you can better utilize those old technologies. And people certainly have sophisticated processes for using them, but ultimately the same themes keep cropping up, especially when you're talking about email and Excel. Is the main that come up to us are mistakes are being made. And Robert alluded earlier about Excel. You can be an Excel wizard and still have issues crop up that something didn't get tabulated right, something didn't get aggregated right. When it comes to email, are we certain that everyone got the same addendum that everyone else got? Was it a fair playing field? Now on the back end, from an audit trail perspective, should you be audited or should you have to respond to a bid protest? Is how arduous is that task to be able to prove that compliance? And if that's all happening in different Excel files, if it's happening in email threads, or if it's happening on paper, it becomes really difficult. Even with the most streamlined way of using those other technologies, it still becomes a huge challenge. And so from our experience, and I know that sounds biased, but from our experience, there is a limit to how much you can do that. I would encourage you to really try and business case for something. We mentioned earlier that a lot of people were online with some form of bidding tool or solicitation tool. At minimum, I'd encourage you to try and create the business case internally for that. And I think what you'll find, especially with, this is going to sound like a plug and it's not meant to, but with a platform like Bonfire, you're going to find that, there's a cost to it, and that lack of funding or lack of budget can seem like a barrier. But oftentimes with the vast majority of clients, we see an ROI on that platform, on the Bonfire platform of 10 or above. So while there is a cost to it, there's certainly a cost advantage as well as an organization. So I would encourage you to explore your options and to try your best to create that business case for some form of technology.
Thanks, Andy. How did you bridge the gap between vendors submitting ITB RFP via the software and some submitting via mail?
We basically let everyone know that when we did our vendor fair, our outreach to everyone, letting them know that we were also switching over to the Bonfire system. We let them know that we were not going to be accepting paper submittals anymore, that everything was going to have to be digital.
How did you quantify the cost to your stakeholders, i.e. taxpayers?
Well, the way that we quantified it, well, we didn't actually quantify it to our taxpayers. Well, we don't have taxpayers. We've got ratepayers. But the idea was, as Andy had alluded to, there is an ROI. And once you have that, the idea is, well, if your return on investment is only going to be X amount of time, then everything afterwards is just going to be cost savings.
Great, thanks, Robert. If anybody has any other questions, please submit those to the Q&A box. We'll leave this up for another minute or so.
While people are doing that, Robert, I'd like to just thank you again for joining us today. It's great to be able to chat with you about your previous experience, and I think I can speak for the audience we had here today that it was great to hear your experiences and how you manage that change. I feel like from what I've heard in the space, it's a very your experience was very typical of what a lot of people are experiencing. And I think it's great for those who are looking to understand how you impacted change and kind of the benefits you've gotten from that. I think you did a really great job illustrating your experience. So I appreciate your time and joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And we had one more question come in. Have you ran a BAFO process with the new system?
We have not run it yet, but we will be doing it probably within the next 4 days. That I have something already that I'm going to ask for a BAFO. It's the way that the system works, it allows for BAFOs without a problem. If you would like me to explain a little bit more, it's essentially once you have your primary evaluations in, you can actually ask for a BAFO, and only those vendors within the competitive range would actually get it. But at the same time, you can also set up another evaluation criteria for that BAFO. So then your evaluators review just the items that were BAFO.
Thanks, Robert. And I don't see any other questions. Do we have any other last minute questions for our panel? All right, I would like to thank Andy and Robert. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar. Please take time to fill out the evaluation survey. A link containing the survey and a recording of this webinar will be emailed to everyone tomorrow. Thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.